by saying what I think I learned and what I take away from this in terms of understanding what has been happening. And I think I understand, first of all, that all from the presentation that there's one thing that when we try to describe state-business relationship, and I use that term in the broad term, not only state-private business, but state-business relationship, there are lots of varieties of kinds of structures that we see. There is not one structure, especially when you look at the post-liberalization, post-80s, if you like, post-80s period, since the 80s, assuming that the old system, when the SOE model was predominant, is the prevailing one everywhere. We have seen how the Iranian model is a different one from the others, where the state-business relationship is taking the form of these conglomerates of different kinds of conglomerates. But we have seen how the Turkey model evolved in terms of how the religious ideological dimension came into play, and the connectedness is along the religious lines. The Lebanese model is one where state business is shaped by sectarian situation and so on. How the Tunisian model was built, at least the Ben Ali one, was built around the family, and the sectarian, the connections was built around the family. How the Moroccan and the Egyptian was are kind of mixture of ruling families and government as they relate to the private sector and so on. And so there are different structures, but and they are not the same. They work different ways and so on. So there is a variety and heterogeneity, as was said. It's an important one. We have seen a lot of illustrations about how this connectedness, whatever is defined, may have negative impacts on outcomes, on growth, on employment, on efficiency, and so on. We have seen lots of examples and excellent work that has illustrated that in many ways. We have seen, on the other hand, very little on the impact of this on distribution. The distribution impact of these connections, we have seen very little on that. We have seen the impact of this connectedness, and then a number of instruments have been used and shown to be used to do that. But I think we have not covered the world of the instruments. The world of instruments is much, much bigger than that. And the data limitations have limited, in a way, the extent to which you can cover, the extent to which the connectedness works. For instance, taxation. How do you know who pays taxes and who does not pay taxes, for instance? This is another instrument of connect. If we have seen a little bit of it, but not much. But this is a big issue. Land, the issue of land is a big one. I think it has been mentioned. How do access to land is really a big instrument to do it. So we have. Finally, we have seen very little on how some of these arrangements can have positive outcomes. Abla told us a little bit of this, but very little. We have not seen, it cannot all be negative. Some of this connectedness may be solving some issues, some credibility issues we have been told. And so also to have the story fully told, we have also to cover what is it that works and has been effective in that sense. And the story is incomplete. So the picture is, we have made a lot of advance, but the picture is still not complete in many ways to understand what's going on. Now, when we put all of this together, I try to see, okay, from the political economy, I think, following on Ishaq and Adil and so on, what explains this variety of ways of doing it? And I would just put forward one idea. I don't know how much it's valuable. If we have a ruling, given a ruling regime, given a ruling group, whatever it is, at a given point in time, this ruling regime is motivated by one thing, to stay in power, right? From political science. And to remain in power as long as possible, and to be sustained, not only to sustain it in the short term, but in the long term. And therefore, it needs sustained power and eventually to enrich themselves. So these are two objectives that they are pursuing. But to sustain themselves in the long run, it has to be creating wealth and to be distributing the strengths and so on. So it has this, so it has in a way to balance what it does in terms of state-business relationship, kind of settlement, so that it ensures the sustainability of the political system, but does not kill the wealth creation prospect. And so it's always trying to balance this. Now, what I would add to that is that what has shaped another dimension which we implicitly talked about is ideology. Ideology has shaped as well some of these outcomes. I mean, it's amazing why is it the Iran, structure comes about? Because they have decided that they don't want privatization. They don't want to privatize private sector, right? That's what, and yeah, they put in the constitution. Yeah, so this has constrained in many ways the way they have this state. So they have to find different ways of allowing the expansion of the private of activity beyond the standard SOEs to a different kind, and they have created these new ways. And in the case of Turkey, you have the religious dimension coming into play and has shaped the way the broadening of the base is taking place. Different situations, I mean, the Ben Ali regimes, because there is no ideology to build on and there is no religious ideology, the family was the only instrument that they could find to do it, and so on and so on. So, I mean, adding the motivation of the political system to ideology explains a lot of this variety and so on. So that's in terms of understanding and what has been happening, and maybe we need to understand more how to explain this variety and what works and doesn't work. I would like to finish by looking forward. Okay, based on all of this, what is it that going forward, how can we move on? Clearly, there is an agenda that was mentioned, but I would like to take it from a more policy perspective, okay, in terms of what can be useful to, not the policymakers as such, but to policy making as such, because policy making is not the role of the policymakers of today, but of society. The choices of societies need to make in terms of going forward and so on. So I think I would appreciate seeing more research which would help us to answer a few questions. I would say 3 of them, but maybe more, one can. And if we can have research to develop this, that would be great. Okay. Given a prevailing political regime, and because there is the whole issue of how to change political regimes, and you can engineer revolutions and so on. That's a different topic. So let's keep ourselves to the issue of it. You take as a given the political regime and the political system. How is it in the case of a political regime which is moving towards more political openness, and I'm worried about regimes if they move into political openness and democratization? How is it that you can develop, and which institutions you need to have to make sure that you don't go into the opposite, which is get the private sector to capture the public sector? And to funding of the political action and political parties is a critical issue. And I'm here asking this question from a Tunisian perspective because this is a big issue that we have today. Okay. How do you make sure that the private sector does not, through the financing of the political activities, become, influencing the political? And here, I mean, I mean, the missing link in the Lebanon study, just in passing, it had looked at it in one way, but not the other way around. It looked at the political system, how is it using the private sector? But I think it did not look how the private sector is capturing the political system itself in Lebanon, and the causality goes the other way. And this is important for openings. It's important for Lebanon today. It's opening for Tunisia today. I think it's important for Morocco today, but it may be important for other countries. It's important for Turkey, I'm sure, and it will go for. The second question, more specific question, is whatever the political regime that you have, whether it's autocratic or democratic, how is it that you can ensure that the political system allows the growth of innovative and wealth-creating firms? And this is this discussion that we had about Korea versus whatever, Egypt and versus whatever other country is really illustrative. How can we tell, which arrangement and what are the things that can be done in terms of the settlement, the political settlement, that does not kill the growth of innovation and large firms which are create jobs and create wealth and create big grants, and comparing to China and so on. And can we, from the experience that we have in our region, see any of this happening, even at some limited extent, and what makes it happen or not happen? And I think that's really an important topic to look at and to illustrate. The third question that I would like to see addressed is about equity. One of the negative impacts of cronyism and political connectors is that it gives this very deep perception of unfairness, and which led to the Arab Spring in one of the deep factors which were beyond, is this. It is not that, many cases, it's not that inequality in itself which is a problem, but it is the unfairness of the way inequality might emerge. So how is it that we can develop mechanisms and political settlements, in the words of Adil or something like that, which controls for that? And I was mentioning that in the US today, one of the big problems that the population is feeling that a deep unfairness about the inequality that has emerged in the last 20 years in the US is about the unfairness of the system that has led to very much increased inequality, which is due to the system being rigged in some way, the economic system, which is creating too much rents in terms and not really creating the wealth, but it's really creating lots of rents which are not fairly accepted as fair by the population. These are three questions. There may be more. I have at least one or two more, but since I don't have, I don't. But I would like to revert a little bit. I mean, through asking these questions, I think we might be coming closer to the policy domain than just trying always to understand and not having really something to say to the society as a whole. Okay, what does it all mean when you try to design institutions, when you try to define reforms, when you are trying to change the system as such? I will stop here.